Welcome, everybody, to episode 49 of Radicalized, Truth Survives. I'm here with Jim Stewartson and High Fidelity. I've once again been relegated to my hallway because my tech is utter shite, but doesn't matter. The show must go on, and democracy must go on. And we have an incredible episode, part 2 with David Pepper. When he was here a few weeks ago, we talked about the fight ahead. You guys showed up and we're very grateful. Now we're going to be talking about the long battle ahead. This is real. We have to stay on offense, and we've got a lot that we're going to be, sharing with you guys today. So how's everybody doing? How you guys doing?
Not dead yet.
Yeah, it's a different mood out there this week.
I'll say. Well, I'm very excited because we have a lot of good things to talk about, a lot of things that we're very concerned about, but we're going to just jump right in. Let's go ahead and get right into Front Loaded.
Front Loaded.
All right. So as you guys know, this is an investigative show about disinformation. I can feel, and I'm sure the gentleman would agree with me, very proud at the work that we've done, particularly the interviews that we had leading up to the midterms with Jason Stanley, David Pepper, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Doesn't get much better than that. All our friends from Ukraine. Super, super stoked. But let's just not ignore the obvious. And what I want to talk to you guys about first is GOP gaslighting. High-ranking members of the GOP cult are trying to gaslight their way out of culpability for fealty that they had with Trump. And I'm just not having it. This was inspired by a Mitt Romney tweet where he's just like, oh, democracy and authoritarianism, and we better be worried about election deniers. And it's like, we must do exactly what Ruth Ben-Ghiat has taught us and not memory hole the attempted overthrow of our democracy, the people that we lost during COVID, the fact that the GOP stood beside a, twice impeached president, disgraced president. And I just want everybody to be paying attention because they're going to try to make you forget. And we must not allow that. So that was my first item. Gentlemen, what say you?
Yeah. No, you better not. No one over here is forgetting. And what you said about remaining on offense is very important. So we got Senate. It looks like, thank God, Kari Lake is not going to be autocrat of Arizona. We escaped the 2 worst election deniers for secretaries of state, all of that's good. But unless we take advantage of this opportunity that all of us together have worked so hard for, we'll just find ourselves back where we were. So keep it going.
I would just like to say, anytime Mitt Romney says anything about Trump, I just want to show him that picture.
All right. This one's for Jim. Many years ago, I interviewed Ruth B. May. She's a scholar. She did the most incredible, Putin's proxies story, where she was the first one to really map out how much Russian money the GOP had taken. And it was in that incredible, it was a Texas newspaper, and she just blew it up, the Dallas Morning News, I think. Anyway, Ruth became a friend, but she told me early on, don't worry, the story will end well. Evil people eventually turn inward and devour each other. And I'm bringing that up because I'm sure, Jim, you saw in the last couple of days, Alexander Dugin calling for Putin's execution. And I was like, immediately thinking, is this the part where the evil people devour each other? Is this what Ruth was talking about? And I just wanted to bring that up because I'm sure you, of all people who have brought us more information about this than anybody, has an opinion on that.
Well, so Dugin lost his shit like a lot of the right wing did when Putin retreated from Kherson. And yeah, he more or less said that, Putin is a loser and that he is, the shame of Russia and should basically be either, deposed or executed, one of the two,
Right.
in his thing. And a couple hours later, that message disappeared, and a giant, how dare anyone think that I would betray the supreme leader, blah, 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 blah.
Wow.
And he's been reposting that message like all day long. So that's how it works in Russia. Um, and, but generally speaking, Putin's propagandists are losing the plot. Even on TV, they're like, wait a second, you declared that this was Russian territory and immediately left.
Yeah.
You look like a big dumbass.
Yeah.
And why are you killing people, killing Russians in your special military operation when it's clearly a joke? But he still can kill people. There is still a very, very bad problem with the window industry in Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dugan certainly knows that someone killed his daughter. So yeah, I think
Maybe.
when we're starting to see this kind of, we've all been waiting for that elite defection to occur, because that's always the sign of a dictator falling. That's another lesson from Ruth Ben-Ghiat. All these great Ruths in the war, Ruth B. May, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. So I found that to be very curious. And
Well, I mean, and as I've been saying for a very long time, everyone's abandoning Trump because Trump is not going to be president in 2024. That's a joke. Nobody believes that is going to happen. It's just that they're all too afraid. They're just too afraid. They're just in a cult and they don't know how to fight back against the cult leader. And the reason for that is because it would bring their entire reality down around them.
yeah,
But some of the people in the Republican Party are, the reality of the rest of the world is starting to come through. And they're like, some of the most rabid Republicans are like, we got to get rid of Orange Mussolini because he's fucking us up.
so go ahead, Hi-Fi. I know you want to say something.
I'm going to call it now, right? Trump is going to turn into a martyr of the deep state because justice will come for him eventually.
Yeah.
That will give the GOP more outrage to platform on.
Yeah.
And unless we take down the apparatus that was behind Trump and the insurrection, which I would just like to state for the record, the January 6th Commission releasing their report and focusing only on Trump is a travesty.
Yeah.
Travesty. All right.
We've talked
but
about
if
that.
we do not continue with, that's the theme for the next 2 years is accountability.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The committee, we want part two. We want part two. And everything is still hanging in the balance as we record this. It's funny,
because Lauren Boebert
I know.
might win or might not. Like the idea that our, democracy is relying on Lauren fucking Boebert is just astounding.
It's terrible. But I will say, for a year that we've been doing this show, Jim has been saying Trump is done, Trump is done. And it's interesting because I remember 1994, the year punk broke because the Offspring and Green Day had massive records. And I remember thinking, like, punk's been around since the 70s. What the hell are they talking about? But what it really meant was the mainstream had caught on. And I just spoke with somebody who was telling me that, somebody that he knows who's a major Republican operative yesterday was like they're all fleeing like rats on a ship. So I guess this is when the mainstream becomes aware of what we have known for a long time that he's done. And we've already seen them anointing Ron DeSantis, which is going to be another nightmare. But, here we are. But I do think it is, I think what Hi-Fi said is obviously our theme moving into 2023, accountability and staying on offense. Those are the themes that I plan to work with. And just a shout out to Byline Times podcast. They had me on talking about the midterms, which I would not have been able to do if you two had not coached me. I have you and David Pepper, and you two and Pepper are like my democracy coaches now. It's so great. Like I feel like I've got like the most incredible minds backing me up. But what was really fascinating listening, because I was interviewed with their political reporter, Sam Bright. And what was amazing about this is that listening to Sam sum up UK politics, I was so triggered because what they're trying to sell in the UK right now is compassionate conservatism, trickle down, all that bullshittery. And so I was listening to that going, oh my God, like all that stuff, the people in the UK better rise up and rise up fast, because it does not look like it's going to get better on its own. One other thing I wanted to say is that I woke up to Byline Times being censored. As our viewers know, I write for them. I'm their American political correspondent. And I believe, and I think you guys will probably back me up, that the financial stenographers need to stop looking at how Musk is going to get a return on his investment and better start realizing that I think part of the aim is to destroy the community of investigative journalism and activism, pro-democracy, truth activism. You two are perfect examples. You were deplatformed from Twitter. We're watching censorship. Byline Times was censored in the last 24 hours. Everything's in disarray. You don't know what's real and what's not. It's the shit show that Jim predicted. And remember, Jim, last week, I said, when is it going to get really bad? And you said tomorrow. And guess what? It's going to hell rapidly. And yet, here we are, still fighting for truth.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's sort of a relief just to see it unmasked for what it's always been.
Yeah.
It's always been a giant influence war, right? It was set up from the beginning to be warfare, a battle space. And it's one thing to do that and then actually let people battle it out on fair territory.
Right.
But that's not ever what it was designed for. It was designed to radicalize people, and it has. And it's no wonder that the world's richest troll bought it just so he could laugh it up, turn it into a Klan rally, and take the parts and pieces and put it into whatever libertarian anarchist nightmare he has planned. It's done.
Bananas. It's bananas.
Go to Mastodon, everybody.
I'm on Mastodon, and I can't figure out where I am or how to find it.
It's not. There's some things that are counterintuitive, but once you get it set up,
all right,
it's actually great.
Okay.
We'll get it set up. Don't worry.
Okay.
We'll get you set up.
Okay.
So people don't be afraid. You don't have to leave Twitter necessarily. Just understand you're on enemy territory. Treat it that way, right?
Yeah,
protect yourself. If like share the truth, go fucking give people shit, but just know that you can get wiped at any moment.
Speaking of giving people shit, my GOP gaslighting thread went quasi-viral in this particular era. And immediately I get someone assigned to me who says, oh, look at the coward who won't let people comment on her thread. And it's like, Man, I immediately was like, coward, fuck you. I've been harassed for 6 years. I'm protecting myself, locking it down finally so I can protect myself from the trauma merchants. But then I was just like, I've learned to remove myself and evaluate it for what it is and just move on. I don't let it derail me like I used to. Unfortunately, I've gotten seasoned at this fight, which is, which has its pluses and minuses because as Brianna Wu taught us, it does change you. You do become fucking harder, and it's part of the war that we're in. But here we go. And thank you for that robust intro, gentlemen. And now let's get into possibly, aside from the Pepper interview, one of the most important things we're ever going to do. And that is defining a word that is the shittiest word in the fucking American language with our word phrase of the week.
Word phrase of the week this week: gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is it's a crappy word to describe what is ultimately a terrible thing. It's when you redraw districts such that the other people can't ever win because you've used math to screw them out of their voice in a democratically elected government. It comes from a marriage of the words. Elbridge Gerry was his last name, and he drew a district in Boston that looked like a salamander. So gerrymandering is a Jerry salamander. Honestly, I think the Pokemon is the best. But here is a good representation of what gerrymandering does. Obviously, there's more blue, right? And if you drew it evenly, blue would win. But when you play the numbers, as they do in the third picture, you will never lose if you are red.
So fucked up. Thank you. I mean, that's Texas and Florida in a nutshell, Ohio.
Oh yeah, and that's a big word, and a lot of people don't get it. So another way to say it is dirty maps. They draw dirty maps to take over.
And look, this is like an invention in the last couple of decades of people who do not want people's votes to count.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what's going on there, right? You combine that with Citizens United, which allowed them to pump any amount of money that they wanted into any of those districts. And that's why you have this structural, sort of constant tipping point between democracy and not democracy, is because we've allowed the system to be weaponizable, right? So that a bunch of white old men can sit in a room and draw fucking crazy lines on a map and fuck you out of your vote, out of having it matter, out of having an actual representative democracy. The entire project is to take our rules and twist and weaponize them against us so that there is minority rule, and fuck that.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And in the conversation that we're going to have with David Pepper, and what Hi-Fi knows very well is that in Ohio, these dirty maps were declared unconstitutional, and yet look what happened in Ohio. Look what just happened in Ohio. We have lots of victories that we will talk about with Pepper in the midterms, but Ohio is absolutely fucked because of gerrymandering. So look up the word and know that we are going to be very busy in 23. If you need a few days off to recover from all the work you've done to, rally people, take it, but do not sleep, because we have a chance of staying on offense. And part of what we're going to need to do is deal with this gerrymandering shit, because it's not going to go away. And as Jim always reminds us, the fascists don't go away. They have to be defeated. And this is part of defeating fascism. All right, gentlemen, why it matters.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? By High Fidelity.
First story this week. You don't invite mosquitoes. What is this story about? Well, at COP27, which is supposed to be a conference about addressing climate change, there has been a sharp rise in the number of fossil fuel representatives. This has caused one person attending to say, I don't understand. If you were going to have a conference on fighting malaria, you wouldn't invite mosquitoes. Which is absolutely brilliant. Love it. But we also have reports from people on the ground at COP27 that there's also an impressive number of Russian oligarchs wandering around as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
I'm sure this will be a highly effective conference.
I mean, yes, that's bad. The other thing is that maybe some of these companies are starting to get the message that they're going to have to, that there's actually more money to be made not destroying the world.
So,
right.
Who
knows? Maybe they'll figure that out. Maybe they're trying to figure that out. What they're really trying to do is disrupt everything and throw chaos into the system, for sure, because they want to sell the rest of the dead dinosaurs that they have. But maybe being around some people who actually give a shit about the world and can show them that, hey, there is newfangled technology that does not involve dead dinosaurs that we can get going. So
that would require a pivot in thought process, which would require most likely a change in management. But I have an idea on how we can get the management to change, and that would involve accountability of the management for their malfeasance.
One thing I want to point out, I did an epic thread called 0 Days to Waste, because I got into this because of climate justice. I had done a ton of reporting for Al Jazeera America on the climate crises. And so that was like 2015. And so 2016 rolls around and it's like, okay, I see where this is going. It's going to be the 80s all over again. Greed is good all over again. The fossilized set will be, hard charging again. And so, but way down in the thread, I realized that at some point, the GOP somewhere around 2019 got some polling back and they found out that people actually care about climate change. So for a brief minute, you had people like Matt Gaetz and a couple others talking about, climate change. But for the most part, they've all fallen in line behind the fossilized set. And that is a big part of why I feel like the oil company heads have just been so supportive of this war in Ukraine, because how much money have they made? I mean, is this their last gasp to, try to get as much as they can before the inevitable shift? I don't know, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on.
The oil and gas industry is largely responsible for all of this shit, right? Because the oil and gas industry started the CNP, for example, just as one example.
Wow.
Right? Because and not only did the oil and gas industry start the CNP, but they started this apocalyptic cult, right? The overall apocalyptic cult of, Christian doom that has, turned into QAnon and all this other shit, right? It comes from the oil and gas industry psyoping people to not care about the planet.
Yeah.
Right? Because if Jesus is coming down on his fucking magic carpet to rescue you and leave all the infidels and the Jews behind, you don't give a shit about climate change. You just want to sell your dead dinosaurs so you can live it up while you wait for Jesus. That's what's going on.
It's what I do want to say, though, because we've been doing a ton of reporting on Council for National Policy. I've done multiple interviews with Ann Nelson. Of course, we've had Brent Allpress on this show. But one thing that Brent tweeted, which I thought was pretty great, is the CNP was one of the biggest losers in the midterms as well, because some of their, some of the folks that they backed did not make it. And I think it's, very important to note that,
Totally.
sometimes we think it's inevitable and they're all powerful and all of this, but, they can be, they're,
I've been watching a lot of Charlie Kirk's coverage.
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk is the Hitler Youth lead of the CNP, and so he has a show that he does with Bannon and Posobiec and a bunch of other ones. And oh my God, they're crying. The fascist tears are flowing. Oh man, it's just glorious.
Yeah.
I would
my
like
God.
to point
I
out.
like-
I would like to point out. that
Drown me
tears-
in your tears, Charlie. Oh.
their fascist tears are not flowing enough because they are still free men.
I agree. Don't get me wrong, but it's nice. We can luxuriate when we have a moment.
Just a moment.
We're just taking a nice break, taking a shower in
Little
the
palate
tears.
See, this is the part. This is the part where Jim and I were talking about having the killer instincts. Our next story, it's a little bit older, but I call it 4F because that stands for Facebook finance failure. What happened is a judge in Washington State fined Facebook the largest ever fine for election disinformation. That's huge, right? The largest ever. It's $25 million, except here's the thing. That's nothing to these people. Literally nothing.
I mean, look, whenever you can like actually punish people, $25 million is still $25 million, right? Even for Facebook. Now, here's the real story about Facebook. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg was worth about $120 billion like last year. This year he's worth like $40 billion. And that's because Facebook is dying. It is, in general, the old social media is falling off the planet, and good fucking riddance.
Yeah.
I would like to point out that I have promised our viewers many, many moons ago that I set out to destroy Silicon Valley. How am I doing?
Doing all right, hi-fi. Hey,
Thank
so
God.
when I hear $25 million, you know what I think?
What?
I think about 2016 November, the very first post-election headline after Trump's fake victory, where the $25 million settlement came down for Trump University. And that was the first headline. That was another Ponzi scheme. That's always what he does. And then I remember tracking it down to, which billionaire, all of a sudden found $25 million or somewhere thereabouts that he suddenly randomly back-owed Trump so Trump could pay that debt. And God, again, I'm not memory holing any of this. I am staying sharp. I ain't forgetting shit.
Stay on top of this.
I ain't forgetting shit. You guys know I go to the symphony all the time. You know why I go to the symphony? Because I sit there and I listen to this music from the 1800s and I think about everything that's happened in the last 6 years and put all the puzzle pieces together. And then I run home and I write about it. Because there just has to be times where you just reflect, but I'm not going to forget shit. And that is why I torched the GOP yesterday, because I'm like, you guys are going to try to make us forget. We're not going to forget. And it looks like America didn't forget. And it looks like America also didn't fall for their bullshittery and that they thought women's health rights were more important than fucking gas prices and inflation. And thank God for that.
That's right. But still,
I mean,
they're going to try it again, folks. Don't think they won't. So
They
don't
will.
let your guard down. Speaking of
always
not letting
talks
your
about
guard
it.
down.
He
Speaking of
talks
not letting
about the
your guard
coup
down.
in terms of Weimar, Germany. They didn't stop. The beer hall putsch resulted in, that didn't stop them. So eyes
Nope.
wide open, stay on
Yes.
I think you
offense.
stepped on Hi-Fi's transition. I think he had a great transition,
Oh,
and
go ahead.
and so let's try
Say,
and
say it
recreate the
again, because
moment.
my thing's wonky. So go ahead and finish what you were saying, and I'll just shut up.
No, you don't have to shut up.
I don't even
No, I
remember what
want
it
to.
was now.
What
Too
was he
late.
saying, Jim?
I don't
I
know.
don't know.
Something
I
about not
don't.
letting your guard down. And here's why. Look. Look. Sweden just arrested 2 Iranian-born brothers who, for at least the last 10 years, had been spying for Russia, which, okay, what big deal, except one of those brothers actually worked inside the Swedish intelligence services. This is what we call in cybersecurity an insider threat. And why is that important? Well, because that adds to another part of insider threats, in which maybe someone you think is your ally is not, in fact, your ally. And in this case, it would be the UAE. These are our international dipshits of mystery. And that's why it matters.
I love this show. Thank you, Hi-Fi. With that joie de vivre, let's go into Hellscape.
Jim Stewartson's Hellscape. Oh, fuck.
I'm improvising this one because I got to be honest with you. It's a weird week. It feels very different than it did last week, and mostly in a good way. Something broke in the fascist insurgency we've been seeing, not just in the United States, but globally. There was some kind of, I don't know, there was a shift. And a lot of it, I think, was what happened around the elections. But there's also a lot of other very interesting things that I think are just sort of crashing reality back down onto some people in ways that are helpful, although painful. So, one, the cryptocurrency industry. I've been watching this for over a decade, and it's a bunch of sort of random technologies, letters and numbers and dollar signs and weird shit that may have some sort of internal meaning, but to the rest of the world, to any actual value on the planet, it doesn't exist. The whole thing was a giant casino that was set up specifically to be able to launder money for bad actors, right? So I think it's the reason why this is so important is because I think it is a sign that the kind of infrastructure that they've been using for the last 6 to 7 years is actually, sort of falling apart. I've noticed a number of other things. The controlled opposition that I've been, that has been so harmful to me and others that I know, seems to have lost its steam somehow. It's almost like the money dried up or something.
Ooh.
I don't know. Right. And you see what happened with Twitter, right? They were so desperate to try and control the narrative around the election that they convinced a guy to literally burn $44 billion in a fire.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't give a shit about their $44 billion. I hope Elon Musk is a millionaire real soon. That would be great.
Single digit.
Exactly. But what I'm seeing overall is just a centering of people's minds back to a kind of a place of reality that I think is helpful. But the reason for it are that the influences behind all of this are exposing themselves for what they are. Elon Musk gave Senator Ed Markey shit about having a mask in his profile picture this morning.
Yeah.
Right?
Saw that.
Spreading anti-mask trolling to 115.3 million of his followers, plus the rest of Twitter. It's just a giant psyop, and everybody sees it now, right? It's always been that way, but he just got rid of all the puppet masters that were kind of in between.
Yes.
Right? It was always him and Jack Dorsey and these assholes playing the same game. But they got desperate. They really did. That's all you can call it. And desperate is good. And so here's the second part, right? So we're seeing lots of great things. Obviously, the elections, we're keeping the Senate. We'll probably get 51. The House, man, it's the difference between 2 years of Marjorie Taylor Greene as the fucking head of the Judiciary Committee and Matt Gaetz like running any investigations he wants and codifying Roe, right? That's the difference about whether we get the House or not. So big deal. But either way, like there was no red wave. There wasn't even a red trickle. It just dried up. And at the same time, Putin literally turned tail and ran out of Kherson right after he declared it was Russian territory. So what the fuck's going on here, right? There's a lot of people retreating right now. A lot of these bad actors see that this latest effort to overturn global liberal democracy is not working. So, what is our job in this situation? Our job is to say, first of all, thank you to everybody who has been part of this fight. Listen, if you don't think that people like you, like us, like our friends out there fighting this fucking fight, exposing these people, disabling Mike Flynn and his cohorts from being able to operate in secrecy and in a shroud of mystery, which is what they had built for themselves. If they'd been allowed to do that for the last 2 years, we would be in a much worse situation. And that's because we still give a shit about each other, about our country, about our kids, about our fucking future. We still do. We care. That is the best news we could possibly get. But because we care, we tend to take our foot off the gas.
That's right.
We can't do that again.
Ever.
It's a sort of a scary phrase, but killer instinct has been missing from Democrats and liberals for a long time, right? And understandably so. We're mushy. We care about people. We don't want to hurt people unnecessarily. But in this case, it is necessary. We need to crush these motherfuckers into the dirt. Remember, what have they been trying to do? Create the fucking Fourth Reich with Nazi imagery, I mean, the level of attack and propaganda and menace and mayhem that they have, inflicted. We're not fucking forgetting anything. And we're not going to take our foot off the gas. We're not going to take our foot off your neck. Because you tried to kill us. You tried to kill our kids. You tried to kill our country. We're not going to let you do it. So, to everybody, all my friends and colleagues, anyone who has the balls to listen to us after all of this, thank you. It's been hard as fuck, but it has been an honor. And take a deep breath. Let's fucking go, man. We're gonna win this thing, but not if we stop.
Not if we stop. Let's just remind everyone that for 2 years, and Heidi for much longer, we have taken punches for democracy to stand up for what is right and decent in this country. And now that our opponents are on their back foot, you want us to not counterattack? Are you out of your minds?
Oh man, we're here. We're staying focused. We're staying alert and staying rad for sure.
Oh, David Pepper, we are so happy to have you back with us for part 2 of our deep dive on the long battle ahead and how we need to fight like hell for our democracy. As our guests know, David is an activist, a writer, a lawyer, author of The Laboratories of Autocracy, which really explains how we need to be focusing on the state houses, how we need to start playing offense. Those of us who are pro-democracy too often put ourselves in the position of defense, and we need to start playing offense. So many things have occurred since we last saw you. First of all, the midterms are behind us now, and I think we should just start right there. David, what is your high concept takeaway of what just occurred a few days ago?
Well, I mean, one, I'm thrilled like everybody else. This was, I kept on drawing analogies to the past where we've let democracy slip. And I do think we held the line, but we went further than 20. And this is why I think it's such an important day. We didn't only see federal success. We actually saw state level success. And I think if I've had one theme in the book I've written and everything I've spoken since, it's the front line of the attack on democracy is in states. It's state houses. It is secretaries of state. It's state Supreme Courts. The far right, knowing they're in the minority, understand that gerrymandering state houses where they can then launch all these other terrible bills that undermine our democracy and further extremism, that's where they get it done. And that is where they get it done, much more than Congress, if you look closely. And so the fact that we did not lose a single state house in a midterm, something that has not been done since 1934, the fact that we flipped Michigan's Senate and House, the fact that we flipped Minnesota's Senate, the fact that Arizona, we're hoping to flip it, although I'm not sure we're waiting on votes. The fact that I think Pennsylvania is going to flip, some have called it, some haven't. The fact that we even, this doesn't sound like a victory, but when you look at the bigger picture of power, it is in gerrymandered places like Wisconsin and North Carolina, we actually preserve governor vetoes by not giving them a supermajority in the state house. Those are major wins for democracy that we did not see in 2020. So I think for a lot of reasons, and a lot of it is there's some groups out there doing some great work we can talk about. People stuck to their ballot more than they did in 20. And they understood that it wasn't just about Trump, it was about democracy. Maybe some more directly than others, but they stuck to that ballot in a way that we saw some state level successes that are really big. We also, incredibly, maybe the story of the night was not winning one Senate race, although that was critical. It was in every single swing state where an election denier was running for Secretary of State, we beat that election denier. In Arizona, in Wisconsin, I'm sorry, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, because Mastriano would have appointed the Secretary of State.
Right.
And by the way, what was interesting was in those races, at least what I've seen, those election denying Secretary of State candidates underperformed the rest of their ballot, showing that voters kind of saw them for who they were. So what I'd say the big victory, and we can talk about this all the rest of the time, like no one take anything for granted. We got to keep fighting. No one walk away. That's what they want us to do. But that's what we did after good years in the past. But to me, the real success is not just the federal races, which are really important and sort of keep and sort of stave off disaster, but it's that we went on offense in some states and won in those states. Now, just to be clear, and I'm in Ohio, a lot of other states had a bad night. And, Florida, gerrymandered state houses all over the country. And so millions of people are still feeling, I'm not in a democracy. We have to fight for those states. But the fact that we had wins in some states is great news. But the other reason I like it is it can show us how to do it.
Yeah.
And I can point to certain things that were done in certain states to tell those other states that are struggling, you want to know how to do better over time? Look at what the states that flipped their state houses did. And so there's all of a sudden not just examples of problems, but there's also examples of successes. And so it was very good because of that state level success and the federal success. But to the extent we have all these states, my own included, kind of trapped and held hostage by gerrymandered legislatures, there's also some case studies and we can hopefully bring to those places.
So I think that it's really great to feel good and to acknowledge the successes. Where I have a bit of PTSD is that when we voted out Trump during autocratic capture in 2020 and a very decent man, Joe Biden, became our president, I think everybody took a victory lap, sighed relief, went back to their life. And then what happened a few weeks later? Arguably one of the worst days in American history, this incredible violent insurrection where an attempt to overthrow our democracy occurred. So what I want to make sure we don't do moving forward is think that we're okay and think that the battle's over and not look at just how close a shave all of this was and how we still have our Supreme Court. I definitely want to talk about Moore versus Harper, but I want people to look at this as a very important, part of a fight in a long battle.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I do worry about that. I mean, I literally wrote my book in 2021 in about March because I was sensing it. And at the time I wrote it, no one was really talking about the threat to democracy as they figured out later, not nearly as much at least. And yeah, the attack is happening in states. And let's be clear, they always learn from their failures. They don't just give up. There are discussions right now about, I'm sure, what to do in Arizona. I go through it in Ohio. They're going to learn from what Ohio did to attack an independent judiciary. There is work. They always adjust. They don't give up. If anyone thinks that Donald Trump is just walking away, they're crazy. Like, you cannot watch. I mean, think about 2020. He lost everything at the federal level. He got crushed by 7 million votes. At this moment, only 8% of America said that something was wrong with that election. And within months, it was, a majority of the Republican Party. So I couldn't agree more. Those who are not willing to live with the results of a diverse democracy will not accept this. They will learn from it. They will keep fighting. And where will they primarily do it? In states. So yes, I totally agree with you. And again, this talk about, oh, they're going to, I mean, if they didn't reject Trump after the 20 outcome, which
Right.
was a disaster and an insurrection that he clearly led,
Yeah.
and they still didn't only impeach him, but then they're all running around with him within months. Kevin McCarthy, JD
Yeah.
Vance, continue. By the way, even if Trump does go away, and I don't think he will, I don't think they understand what they've created when they think that. But even if he does, it goes on. I mean, they'll continue to gerrymander, they'll continue to suppress votes, etc. So I totally agree with you. And I worry about that a little bit. So here'd be my challenge to everyone listening. Do you know that in states across this country, huge swing states like Arizona, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, there were dozens and dozens of districts that we didn't even contest for state house? Think about how much easier Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock's job would have been if you had had a supported candidate for every state house district in Georgia, lifting the vote, knocking on doors. So what I would say to people is, we can't rest on our laurels. And my first assignment for everyone listening is, let's make sure in every state for 2024, when everything will again be on the ballot, that we are beginning to recruit now to make sure every single state house district has a
Brilliant.
fired up candidate running. Those are the kind of things we can do to not let our foot off the gas, but to go on offense far more than we were on offense even in 2022 when so many districts were even contested. Who contested every district in the country, in the state? I mean, Michigan. Look what happened in Michigan. They had maybe the most successful night of any state. Well, they also are the state that had a candidate in every single state house district. They flipped the Senate, the House. They won big at every level. That's not a coincidence. They went on offense everywhere. Everyone else should do that. That's a very tangible goal we could all set right now, is never again do we allow dozens of districts in every state to simply go uncontested. It's a huge error. Just one example
Brilliant.
of how we can do more, do better right away.
Hi-Fi, I know you want to talk about Ohio, so let's talk about Ohio. I look at it as Peter Thiel, Trump, and Mike Flynn eating a bit of shit this last few days, but not as much as I would have liked them to have eaten. So let's look at Ohio.
Well, so there's so many things. I mean, we can talk about the fact that, our state legislature multiple times submitted maps that were ruled unconstitutional under the state constitution of Ohio.
Let's
We can
start
talk
there.
about,
Let's start there.
yeah,
Let's start
let's
there.
just
Let's start
start
there.
there. That's
Because
one.
again, we have not, Hi-Fi finally said, I said, Hi-Fi, I need a better synonym for gerrymandering. It means nothing. It's the worst word in the English language. And he said dirty maps. And that helped.
No,
But
it's-
let's explain this to people.
Sure. So yeah, Ohio voted on maps in this election that violated our own constitution. Maps for Congress, maps for state house, maps for state senate. I mean, that's just a legal reality. These were not maps that the congressional maps. No court has ever upheld them. And the only court that's ruled on them said they violate the Ohio Constitution. Now I will say one thing I'm proud of is that we overcame that to some degree. We elected 5 Democrats for the first time since 2010, partly because the first map they tried to rig was struck down. And then the second map, so one of the rules that we put into our constitution, the constitutional amendment, is you could no longer split large cities. Because they could no longer split Cincinnati and Akron, those united cities had enough of a base of support that our candidates, Greg Landsman and Amelia Sykes, both great candidates, won. So for those Ohioans who were part of that effort to reform gerrymandering, it mattered. And that extra seat, it used to be 12-4, now it's 10-5. So Ohio did a good thing there, and the reform mattered. But let's be clear, the map should have been more favorable so we could win 6 or 7. And that's what the court said. Even the 10-5 map violates the Constitution. That is actually suppressing Democratic votes in other parts of the state. Now, we came through and won 5, but that map too, even though we gained a seat through good work in those cities, we still were deprived of an opportunity to win 1 or 2 more seats. And the state house and state senate are even worse. So I went through this. Now, again, let me be clear. The top of the ticket did struggle in Ohio against Mike DeWine, who still he benefits from feeling like a moderate. And during the COVID, he actually acted like one for a few weeks, and that became a brand that frankly I think helped him a lot. So I don't know if I don't think this would have been a great year for even fair districts, but here's the formula that was supposed to be used to draw districts in Ohio was a 10-year average of the last 10 years of statewide elections. That the formula should have led to districts that were 54% Republican and 46% Democrat. That's generally where the district should end. Now, maybe in a tough year, that could have even ended up being 60-40. I don't know if you had a bad year. It doesn't guarantee results, but that should have been when the districts were said. The court struck the districts down because they were nowhere near that. And the only competitive districts that the legislature created were competitive Democratic districts, meaning all their candidates were pretty much guaranteed to win no matter what. The only people in this election who had a worry were the Democrats. They were the only ones with competitive districts. The court struck down the maps because of that fact. Here's what 54-46. Remember that number? The Ohio State Senate is 79-21 after this election.
Okay.
And the Ohio House is 67%, 33%. And Congress is 67-33%. That doesn't even reflect the governor race where DeWine won by a lot. The districts are even more gerrymandered by a good amount
Wow.
than the statewide losses. So we are living in an unconstitutional state, and it's only that way because the legislature literally, intentionally, repeatedly violated a court that told them that this was going to be the exact results of the maps that they drew. And we are now living with that, and it is a tragedy. It was a successful attack on the rule of law, a successful ignoring of court rulings, and it worked. And it's it's a sobering thing to live in Ohio. Again, Mike DeWine was going to win that race either way. Let me be clear about that. But to have congressional and state and House results that are so out of whack with even that result, let alone what it's supposed to be, it's just not representative government at this point. And by the way, that's how people in Florida feel.
Yes.
That's how people in Tennessee feel, Georgia. The intense partisan gerrymandering remains everywhere. And over time, Michigan shows us and Virginia shows us that you can beat it. But there are a whole lot of states that are living in this very sort of non-representative world that we're stuck into in Ohio. And a lot of it is a result of, in this case, just outright defiance of court rulings.
And can you say the same for Texas?
Here's my next question.
One quick thing about Texas, because I think it's very easy to overlook what happened. We're trying to seek the good, and as pro-democracy people, I think we are optimists and hopeful. But I can't, all my friends in Texas are Democrats. They're blue. I don't know Republicans in Texas, maybe a couple, but they're screaming about not having representative government.
Yeah. I mean, after I finished my book, I probably mentioned this the last time we talked. After I finished my book and put it out there, I started to get emails from all these states.
Yeah.
Literally, like, just crying out for help. Like, oh my God, what you described in Ohio is our life in Tennessee. I mean, one of the congressional districts that I've already gotten emails with this, I think it's Nashville. They chopped into 3 districts. So they took this Democratic city, and now there's no Democrat in Congress. There's so many places. What DeSantis did in Florida could literally change the majority result in the House. So many of these states are living in a world that doesn't reflect not only the Democrats, but the state.
Yes.
Here's an example. Ohio. Ohio is a pro-choice state by some degree. I'd say a poll came out not long ago, only 10% of Ohioans agreed with the idea that 10-year-old girl should be sent to Indiana to get an abortion every day. But they pass this stuff and no one does anything about it because there are districts they can't lose. So it's not only Democrats who aren't represented. The mainstream views of these states are basically not what these state houses are about. These are, as Sarah Kendzior has written, I just recently read her book, they're basically held hostage by extremists who are sealed off from everyday voters because of gerrymandering. So they're basically passing a 10 or 20% supported agenda. And how do we know this? Went up for a vote in Montana, Kentucky, and Kansas. Abortion access won every time. And those legislatures are doing the same thing. Hold on one second. I apologize.
No. We're a dog show. You can bring the dogs in. They're welcome here.
I'll cut.
This is a very dog-friendly show.
He was in. I was being dog-friendly by letting him out. He never decided he wants in the office or out. But no, the gerrymandering is, again, one of the things about, you'll like this, Hi-Fi. The gerrymandering is as much a battle between extremist Republicans and moderate Republicans as it is between Democrats and Republicans. So Mike DeWine does have a few moderate instincts. He agreed to those illegal maps, okay? He agreed. He broke the Constitution multiple times for illegal maps. Who is the most powerless governor we will see in years? Mike DeWine, because he just gave the power of the state to a gerrymandered legislature who, thanks to that map, have a supermajority, and they can override every veto Mike DeWine ever issues, if he issues one. He's a governor who won by 25 points, who is subject to the whims of a legislature that no one can name. Wow. And so what's happening with gerrymandering in states like Ohio is it's basically eroding power from the well-known officials, including governors, and it goes to state houses that have extremists in power. Almost none of them ever face a real election. Their numbers are such in some states they can override vetoes. And so, Mike DeWine, congratulations. You just, in your final term, your legacy will be that you handed over power to an extremist supermajority who are going to run everything. Wow. And even if you don't agree with this, that, and this, it doesn't matter because they're in charge. Why are they in charge? You put them there by agreeing to illegal maps. So it's more than even Democrat versus Republican. It's extremists putting their arms around a state house to run the place, literally above and beyond even moderate Republicans would run it.
So here's my question.
Amazing.
In Ohio, and I think this would be the case in other places, particularly Florida, possibly Texas, if we had law enforcement doing its job. Let's talk about Governor Mike DeWine's connections to the First Energy scandal, which is the largest bribery scandal in the history of Ohio. His connections to Frank Randazzo, who is the head of our Public Utilities Commission, the money that was spent between the energy companies and the head of our Public Utility Commission. And here's the problem. I have talked to people in Florida, and damn near this exact same situation is occurring in that state. Corruption, bribery, malfeasance. Where is law enforcement in all of this?
Great question.
Yeah. So basically, and I write about this at length in my book, once going back to this sort of model, I basically, I didn't think about this when we wrote it, but I think about it this way now. I'd call it the laboratories of autocracy model of state government. Once you have a set of state house officials, especially who are sealed off from any accountability, you see corruption very quickly. And you see corruption. Yeah. It's endemic.
Yeah.
You see it. It's not only corruption, by the way, like bribery. The entire MO of state houses becomes, since the people back in your district can't vote you out no matter what.
Yeah.
It becomes, that means that public outcomes that suffer in those districts do not change your career. You win even if the schools fall apart or if energy bills are higher. It doesn't matter because you're gerrymandered in. So what do these people spend most of their time doing? Keeping the private players that surround them in the state house happy. And what do those private players generally want? Money from public coffers, or regulation that benefits them, or tax cuts, or bailouts. So the entire system of these gerrymandered state houses becomes a basically massive transfer of public goods to the private. And that takes the form of energy bailouts paid by everyday energy taxpayers. In Ohio, it's taken the form of for-profit online schools and school scams, taking money from public schools. And others, in Ohio, they've raided local government funds to help pay for tax cuts at the top. The entire MO of these places is, and by the way, so those private players who actually can influence your career, if you're one of these state house members, you need them happy. But the people who you don't need to worry about are the people back home voting, because they don't even have a choice. So the entire MO of these places is satisfying those private interests using public goods.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it stumbles into corruption all the time. Now, so I would argue there's a broader corruption of public service happening. It's the hijacking of these state houses for extremist ends and for private ends. But yes, hi-fi, that also does turn into, quite quickly, because there's no accountability, the more sort of over-the-top legal corruption we think of when we see bribery and pay to play. And that also is impacting Ohio. We are now on our fourth speaker of the House in about 6 years, because they keep getting in trouble with the law. Here's the problem, though. When the law enforcement side at the state level, the attorneys general and the auditors are all of the same party, they're not going to do it.
That's right.
We need, and when it's been busted in Ohio, it has been the FBI. They're the ones who are going after the bribery with the energy company. And that trial starts in January. And we'll see what comes out of that trial. But one of the things I call for in my book, given this reality that corruption is endemic, these states are beyond a point where they self-police corruption. They just don't. There are too many of these offices they're all the same party. The current attorney general was the auditor who gave an award to the for-profit charter school scheme that is the scam that's now being investigated by the FBI. He gave them an award as auditor for outstanding bookkeeping at the moment they were cooking the books. So he's not the guy who's going to crack down on them. Why? They were major donors to him and have been major donors to the whole party. So you're in the state, the mechanism that would hold corruption accountable in many states is locked up. And some of those offices are part of the problem. They're not going to be part of the solution. So what we need, hi-fi, I think, is we need the most robust FBI possible, especially in states they will otherwise never police their own. And that's what's happening in Ohio. That we have a lack of accountability crisis in states like Ohio. And by the way, one of the other things that happened, I just tweeted about this morning. We finally elected ourselves an independent court 2 years ago on the Ohio Supreme Court. The Republican legislature, named the most corrupt in the country, I think, by USA Today, immediately got to work to change the rules of how we elect courts by adding party ID to the court races so that they would quickly get a court that was the same party as they're in. Why? Because they don't want an independent court to also hold them accountable. So these systems lock up so there's no longer accountability. And that's why I think we need more outside. If it weren't for the FBI here in Ohio, none of the corruption would have been rooted out. None of it.
I appreciate the reason I really wanted you back on so quickly is I don't think anybody worked harder than you to try to get the word out and sound the alarm on Twitter about why people need to pay attention. And you've just kept whiteboard after whiteboard, explaining why this vote was so critical. And I just watched you just feverishly work. And I appreciate that. But I just want to say, I just did an interview with UK radio, Byline Times Pod, where they had the Byline Times political reporter talking about what's happening in the UK. And I'm bringing it up because the leaders in the UK are talking about compassionate conservatism and trickle down bullshittery. And one of the things that I have learned in the last 6 years, and I was reflecting on this last night, was that all this talk about small government is coming from people who, the reason I believe they want to shrink government to the size of a pinhead is because they don't want the watchdogs to root out their corruption. It's a long way for me to say that I don't think it's about small government, because I think that so many of the people who talk about small government are the first to have their hands out for big contracts and tax breaks and whatnot. But quite frankly, I really think that this whole small government ruse was because they don't want watchdogs. They don't want a robust IRS who can catch
Totally.
them in the act. And can you speak on that to some degree?
Yeah,
Because I think
totally. I mean,
Americans may still be confused. And clearly in the UK, they're still selling something that is complete
yeah.
and total bastardry as far as
I
I'm
mean, the
concerned.
IRS stuff is such a tell. Um, Trying to make it seem like those agents were to go after, you know, the earned income tax credit or something. The problem is at the high end. I mean, think about it. How has Donald Trump gotten away with everything for his entire life? I mean, as if he's been sort of filing honest taxes his whole life. Eh, the problem is at the high end of enforcement, and people, again, lack of accountability. It shouldn't take someone running for president before their white collar crimes somehow get exposed. And so, but the freak out about more IRS agents showed you that people have been living in a world where they're pretty much being not accountable. Um,
Yeah.
but in a state like Ohio, let's be clear, like, they don't want small government, the state house. They want the government aimed at benefiting them. Again, that's why, the small government is happening at the local dying small town, in part because they're not investing in infrastructure there, but
Yeah.
also because they're literally in Ohio for 12 years, they've been siphoning money away from small town budgets. And I know this because I was a county commissioner and city council member. You had a local government fund. They've been pulling the money out to shore up the state's credit rating and to give out tax cuts at the top. And so the irony is,
Boom.
yeah,
Boom.
and so they want this, and it's happening. The state level governments are benefiting the big shots. Whether it's the big donor who wanted to start a charter school scam, which failed Ohio students left and right, the one that I mentioned awarded that auditor, that was paid for by public, local, and state school dollars for a scam.
Wow.
Ohio public education was ranked 5th 12 years ago. We're now in the mid-20s, in part because of the defunding and the movement of money towards scams that weren't educating people. It's funny, high five, Republicans since COVID freak out about online education at home, but for the 10 years before that in Ohio, it was their number one priority because a major donor wanted to do it. They were all about at-home schooling on computers. So the point is that it's not about small government. It's literally people making money out of state government at the expense of public outcomes and public goods. And they're able to do that because gerrymandering seals off those officials from being accountable for their public failures. And the downward spiral, and I go through this in the book, the downward spiral in outcomes is staggering when you look at it. In Ohio, they'll celebrate a big economic deal, and I'm glad when a business locates here, good. But the broader, deeper health of this state, if you measure it through population, stagnation, young people leaving, we're the number one state in the country, usually when it comes to the level of student debt. Our public schools went from 5th to the mid-20s. We have the highest infant mortality rate for African-American infants. In a state with the Cleveland Clinic and Ohio State and Cincinnati Children's. I mean, the public outcomes are in a downward spiral, and the same people are in power. Why? Because, again, they have decoupled public outcomes and their success. They can win either way, and they actually win often because they're helping the very people who want a piece of the public pie in a way that those outcomes fall. That is the model. And it's the reason you see dying towns and poor infrastructure and an energy grid collapsing in Texas where people froze to death, and 4 days of school a week in Kansas, which allowed Laura Kelly to not just win the first time, but now a second time, is because the Model East governments is all about taking public dollars and goods and putting them to private ends of those who are right in their face.
Hey, that sounds like Peter Thiel.
Baby, take a bow. Like that is what I was looking for. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you nailed it,
That
man.
yes. Go ahead, high five.
So let's talk about accountability, right?
Yeah.
We've got here in Ohio, we have a Ukrainian oligarch who ripped off a Ukrainian state bank named Kolomoisky. And Kolomoisky owned buildings in downtown Cleveland, and he owned a plant in central Ohio that is now caught on fire twice. Where is the accountability for foreign money, foreign influence coming into our state? And not just our state, but let's talk about
Everywhere.
foreign money all over the freaking place. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia and the Cleveland Clinic and how much money the Kingdom of Saud gives to the Cleveland Clinic. I mean, what do we do to stem this tide of foreign influence in our states?
I mean, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I'm looking for accountability on even such simpler things than that. That I think that level has to be, at the national security. I mean, I'm worried about the fact that Saudi Arabia has the second biggest share of Twitter right now. I think
Of course, yeah.
is really worrisome.
Mhm.
And I am someone who wrote about, my first book was all about a Russian oligarch getting involved in business in Ohio and then changing the out. So, but I will say, like, I worry about your question originally. We better be able to hold actual sitting politicians in states like Ohio accountable for openly violating laws or other things. I worry that the kind that you're talking about is even harder to get at. And that's where my number one answer would be, my hope is that we can get people in Washington with national security and other, type briefs to be dealing with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I worry that we literally, sitting state house members violate our own constitution for a year and there's nothing anyone does about it.
Right.
It's not even looked into. On and on. We just see this, Trump and I mean, if they don't indict Trump in the coming months, I don't know.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
I'm looking for the most rudimentary accountability for
Yeah.
the most open attacks on the rule of law.
Yeah.
And I would say the other stuff is disturbing and out there. I don't know as much as you do about it, but I want to see the most rudimentary accountability.
Yeah.
Here's the problem, and we see it with Trump. He's a great example, but he's not the only example. Lack of accountability doesn't let people just get away with it. It invites them and almost inspires them to go further.
Yes, that's right.
When we see the lack of accountability, it's like they're thinking, well, geez, everything worked. I'll just keep going and going. There's been a lack of accountability for state house behavior for years.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they're more aggressive about banning drop boxes or election denying. They weren't held accountable for getting rid of early vote. They weren't held accountable for passing all sorts of crazy laws. So that I would say my first priority, and I know more about this, so maybe that's why we need accountability for some of those basic things that sitting politicians are doing immediately.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you brought up the Ohio Republican Party violating the Constitution on voting maps.
Mhm.
I would point out that in the state of Ohio, the way our educational funding is done has been unconstitutional and ruled unconstitutional for what, decades now?
Mhm.
Where's
I
the
can't remember
accountability for
original
that?
case. Yeah, it's only 20. There isn't. I mean, that's the problem. We
Okay.
have, so people will hear me sometimes and assume, man, that guy's super partisan. No, I'm actually, and I may be in moments, but I'm actually a lawyer. And the reason this bothers me more than anything else is, as a lawyer, we have in Ohio a legislature that ignored the Ohio Supreme Court around school funding. We have a legislature that ignored the Ohio Supreme Court multiple times around illegal maps. We have a son who's a sitting Supreme Court justice ruling in cases involving his dad, the governor, not recusing, but ruling in his favor. Like, this is a 5-alarm fire of the rule of law. And as a lawyer, like I'm about to get, as a lawyer, you get 24 hours of classes every 2 years for continuing legal education. That costs some money. I'm like, I'm going to do it. But at some point, your law license becomes less meaningful if you're in a state where the rule of law is literally disappearing because his son is ruling in his dad's cases. If the next round of illegal maps are upheld, the maps that were found illegal all year are upheld by a new Ohio Supreme Court, the swing justice of that vote will be the son of the governor who agreed with those maps. I mean, that's something you expect to see in some foreign country that doesn't really have a democracy. That's not something you expect to see in an American state. So we do have a rule of law and accountability crisis. And this legislature just doesn't think that they have to follow the Constitution if they don't agree with it or like it. And they don't have to follow a court that tells them to follow the Constitution. And they simply haven't for the year. And it's just really disturbing as someone who forget party, just believes in the rule of law, to see that all happen and nothing happens, as you said, whether it's school funding or gerrymandering.
Right. That was brilliant, gentlemen. I've got a couple things I want to hit on before we lose you.
Okay.
One thing I always see, because this is an investigative show primarily about disinformation. We cover many other things, but that's our core. And one thing that I've watched in the disinformation space is, in order to keep people hooked, it's like addiction. They have to ratchet up. They have to, make the doses even more extreme. And I think we can see that with Trump, the way that the stochastic terrorism and the different things that he's done, down to the, simulation of a, Nuremberg type rally where they're all out stretching their arms. Everything has to be continually ratcheted up. And I think that because they sort of, I think, jumped the shark with Dobbs, I do think we had a bit of a Rovember. I do believe that. I do believe that we saw in America that they kept cranking up that heat, and all of a sudden Americans were like, wait a minute, and something that we did not want, we got served. And I do believe that there was a response to that.
Huge.
So
that there's no doubt. I mean, and by the way, they almost succeeded. And some Democrats almost helped them succeed when they said, oh, no one cares, and talk about the inflation. And people started trying to shame certain Democrats for talking about abortion.
Yeah.
Who did well? Gretchen Whitmer and John Fetterman. They talked about abortion all the way through. In Pennsylvania, it was the number one issue. But people tried to convince them to stop talking about it. Why did Mitch McConnell tell Lindsey Graham to not bring that forward? He knew it was killing them. He knew it. Why did I believe, and this is going to sound a little bit wily, but I actually believe it. I think Ron DeSantis is sending migrants to Martha's Vineyard was about changing the subject. That was right.
Yeah.
The abortion conversation was at a fever pitch. So I actually think that they knew, the smart ones knew, that Dobbs was a disaster. In Ohio, Mike DeWine scrubbed references to his lifelong push to get rid of Roe v. Wade. He got them off his website.
So did Blake Masters.
He wouldn't debate. So did others. Mitch McConnell said to stop talking. I think the Republicans actually knew, maybe better than a lot of Democrats, not all, but a lot, how problematic this was. I mean, what I tweeted late in the campaign was, because I was seeing people try and push it off the front page. And the media, frankly, did push it off the front page, was you usually lose a midterm when you're not in power. That's how it goes. And the only exceptions to that have been when there's something came along that disrupted that narrative. 9/11 was an example. Dobbs was the disruption. I think they knew it. And I think the reason they wanted to make it about crime and inflation was to get it back to a normal midterm. If all Democrats had done the last 3 months was talk about economy, we would have lost. That was the topic they wanted to talk about. And to not have talked about Dobbs and to let it totally go away would have risked going back to your typical midterm. And good for people who were pushing to not let it. And by the way, Dr. Oz helped with this late too. it was kind of dying. And then he said, hey, it should be up to a woman, a doctor, and local elected officials. Like, that was a gift, because all around the country, it was a reminder, oh, yeah, that's what they want. So, no, the Dobbs decision played an enormous role in this. It disrupted your typical midterm, and the fear of people that were losing democracy, I think, not as much as Dobbs, but did motivate people maybe to show up that otherwise maybe wouldn't have. But your typical midterm is a slump, and Dobbs got young people out, and young people also showed up in big numbers for midterm. And so, no, I totally agree with that. And the Republican behavior, and this is sort of a lesson. Anyone who in the last month was telling Democrats, oh, you're talking about abortion too much, needs to go back and remember that they thought that. And the
Yeah.
lesson we need to learn, I don't say this to be critical, is if Mitch McConnell or whatever Republicans who seem to actually be more strategic than Donald Trump,
Right.
if they are desperate to keep their people from talking about something, you probably want to be talking about it. They probably know something. If they're scrubbing it from their websites, you probably want to talk about it.
Yeah.
If they seem to be scared of something,
Yeah.
don't let them win this. It's an arm wrestling competition in the camp.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Your issue or our issue?
Yeah.
If they're desperate to get an issue out of the conversation, it probably means you want it in the conversation. And a lot of candidates had good instincts on that. They ended up being some of the most successful candidates on the ballot.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. Couple more items. One would be when we talk about the long battle ahead and the
Yeah.
long battle for democracy, two things I'd like you to do. One, give people a lesson from is it your great great grandmother?
Yeah.
Give people a lesson from that, and then also please don't leave here without telling people why they need to pay attention to Moore v. Harper and
Yeah.
why we cannot sit there and think everything's okay. Not with this Supreme Court. No way.
Yeah. So I taped this video about my great 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 grandmother who was at Seneca Falls. And I use her and all suffragists and all civil rights heroes to show that they understood that, as we need to understand, we're in a battle for democracy itself. It's not about a federal cycle with a few federal races, which is often how we think about it. And I worry we may be thinking about what just happened in that narrow way.
Me
It
too.
is a battle for democracy itself. It is the same battle that's been fought for centuries. There are always people attacking democracy. Always. That's our history. And you have to understand that's a long battle. It's a battle not just about one cycle. It's not a battle just about campaigns. Do you think John Lewis spent the early days of his life, or my great great grandmother, just running around trying to get people elected? No, it was about every aspect of motivating people to engage in our democracy, of standing up to those who would be against that democracy. And a lot of that happens in a campaign these days, but a lot of it needs to happen outside of campaigns. And so the point is, if we view this as only a cycle by cycle deal, and then we shut down for the next year and don't do anything, or if we view one victory as a permanent victory, or we view one bad cycle, which I worried this might have been, as the ultimate loss and will never recover, that's how you lose the long battle for democracy. It's going to keep going and going and going. And when you have a good win, keep going on offense. Do not stop. In 2008, we had a historic win, and we let off the gas, and they crushed us in 2010 in a way that we're still recovering from. In 2020, we slowed down a little bit, but we recovered in time to have this. It is a long game. It never stops. It's not only about federal offices. It's not only about elections. It's not only about election cycles. So the point of that story is you got to keep going. And most of the most important work that needs to be done to be successful, let's say 2024, should happen in 23. Registering all those voters that have been
Yes.
recruiting so we have a candidate in every district. That's work that needs to begin now,
Yes.
December, January.
Yes.
Don't sit around and relax for a year and a half and then
Yes.
discover once again we have 40 uncontested districts in state after state. That's how you lose. So the
Mhm.
point is, it's a long game. It never stops. It's not only about each cycle. Take a breather if you just worked your tail off for this election, but not for the
Mhm.
next year. maybe for a few weeks, think about what you did, assess what we can do better, assess where we made mistakes, assess what works, and then just keep right on going. Stay on offense.
Yes, 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 yes. That was
Speaking of
so
staying on,
brilliant.
it was. Speaking of staying on offense, here's my question. You know, we've talked about accountability. Do we need to like start calling the Department of Justice and the FBI, send them
Maybe.
postcards, write them letters? Like, what's
Yeah,
going to get through to them that we
yeah,
need accountability? It's
yeah.
time. We need to be adults, actually save democracy.
Well, I mean, let's hope that they were waiting for the election to be over before they do what they need to do on these stolen documents, which seems
Yeah.
like a very open and shut case.
Yeah.
I do hope they are tough, not just on the people who stormed January 6th, but those who planned it. Let's hope that
Absolutely.
for that. And then, we'll see in Ohio. Let's see how this trial goes. My hope is the trial, and we have a trial, Heidi, in Ohio beginning January of that first energy bribery scandal.
Yeah.
And my hope is we see real accountability there. And by the way, I don't want to make it sound too simple, but a little bit of accountability goes a long way. The
Absolutely.
problem is we've had none of it. But if
That's
you
right.
see the former Speaker of the House of Ohio, locked up for that, well, maybe the next time all the other state house officials will think, "Oh, we don't want to go there."
All right.
And that's true with January 6th and the documents as well. So my hope is we do see that. And I will say, in Ohio, the FBI, to their credit, has been quite aggressive. They're the ones who rooted this out. They're the ones who have been looking into some of the other ones. And my hope is that we see in January in Ohio at least a successful trial that hopefully is a domino about other corruption too.
I can't tell you how invigorated I was after our last interview. I felt like I had just been coached because you were just so inspirational. And Hi-Fi knows that I have been working all year in community politics as a campaign manager. My candidate has a nice lead on her opponent.
Oh, good.
I went to the election night party. I looked around at 400 people who showed up. I knew all their names and all their family member names because they all participated in democracy. They all volunteered to get my candidate elected. And it was quite a beautiful, beautiful thing. So, what you just said about planning now, yeah, I needed a few days off. We all did. But I'm not going to be asleep. I'm not going to sit there, as Hi-Fi said, and throw confetti. I'm grateful that the biggest loser in the last week was Trump. I feel good about that. But we've known on this show, at least, how done he's been for a long time. But I think it would be remiss if we did not tell people that when you talk about state houses and what's happening and learning to play a game of offense, we have a Supreme Court with some cultic members in it, and they are about to look at a case out of North Carolina, which I'm sure you must know about, Moore versus Harper. And if you don't, that's okay, but I think that you do. We need people to look
last week
at this type of stuff. And before I let you go, if you...
Yeah, I was going to say it is a case.
Okay, please give us their attention.
Yeah, so it would take everything that happened in Ohio for the last year, where the legislature ignored the Supreme Court of Ohio all year, and it would say that's okay. It would literally say the structure of our Constitution allows legislatures to ignore courts. In fact, it says courts can't review what legislatures do. So if everything I described earlier about how it's troubling that a legislature simply ignored a state Supreme Court saying you're violating the law, you're violating the Constitution, the theory being advanced in Moore v. Harper is saying, well, that's how it's supposed to work. The legislature doesn't have to follow anything but their own instincts about what the Constitution says, which, if you look at the state of our legislatures around the country, would be a disaster. Now, I'm going to tell you something that I think might sound, too positive. I'm not convinced this is going to happen. It is such a rogue theory. It is such a lawless theory. You actually see quite conservative people, including the founder of the Federal Society, the co-founder, filing briefs saying this is absurd, saying, of course, the history of our country includes state Supreme Courts reviewing state laws. that have to do with elections, which is what it's about. So I'm not convinced that John Roberts, or let's say even knock on wood, Brett Kavanaugh go along with it. But it is, if it were to happen, it would be an absolute disaster. And everything I've just described in Ohio and all these other gerrymandered legislatures, including Wisconsin's, for example, maybe the worst gerrymandered state in the country, it would basically put them in a place where they're not only not accountable to the voters anymore, but on key issues, they're not even accountable to a court. Now, I don't know how that has anything in common with what we think of as an American system of government, but that's what that would create. It's a rogue theory. My hope is it actually does not survive these arguments. And by the way, one other thing, in Wisconsin, there was a case a couple of years ago in the Supreme Court where Roberts, and this is one reason I have a little bit of hope, folks listening should look it up, called Rucho, where the Supreme Court literally said, oh, when it comes to reforming gerrymandering, states can modify their constitutions and state courts can uphold those modifications. So only a couple of years ago, Roberts, Kavanaugh, and others signed an opinion that was the exact opposite of the independent state legislative theory. So my hope is, they try to be a little bit consistent with the fact that they basically didn't seem to think this was the case only 3 years ago. Hopefully that thinking stands. The other thing that the independent state legislative theory would mean in the end, if you take it seriously, is that not even the people, through changing their own state's constitution, can change things vis-a-vis their legislature, which is, again, completely lawless. If you read the argument from North Carolina seriously, it's literally saying that the people of a state like Ohio can't even amend their constitution to guide the legislature around things like elections. That's outrageous. That's saying that the current legislature even trumps their own people. So it doesn't make sense. And, knock on wood, we can only hope the U.S. Supreme Court agrees to some degree.
Hold on, Heidi. You use the word absurd. I would like to give you a couple things that are absurd. What is absurd is one of the members of our Supreme Court is a member of a literal cult. What is absurd is that we have a Supreme Court justice who will not recuse himself from cases involving his wife's involvement in an attempted coup. That is absurd. What is absurd is we have a justice who was never credibly investigated by our FBI. Those are absurd as well.
Thank you for that high five. So yes, I don't think we can rely on the kindness of extremist judges for sure.
The Thomas lack of recusal troubles me like the one here does. I still think there's a chance that we don't see this full-fledged theory get put into place by this court. By the way, there's another case in front of the court that would really gut another part of the Voting Rights Act. That case I worry about is much more likely to be acted upon. And one of the things that happens, and I got to jump off, but one of the things that happens in these Supreme Court terms is they have several really bad cases. And the court doesn't go all the way in one of the cases, and everyone celebrates. But in the other case, they do, and they do some really big damage, but no one really sees it for as bad as it is. And there's another case involving the Voting Rights Act and race that I worry is set up for them to basically gut a huge part of the Voting Rights Act when it comes to trying to make sure we have, equal representation in legislatures. So we'll see where that one goes, but that one really worries me.
All right, last word, David Pepper. Last time we were here, prior to the midterms, you said you told everybody to fight like hell. What are your marching orders in summation for our viewers?
Just, let's keep hoping that we get the House. Keeping the Senate's a big deal. Those state House and Secretary of State and governor wins are huge. They show that we've made progress versus 20 and going all the way through the ballot. But as we've said, we cannot get complacent. They will respond to these losses like they did after 2008. They will respond. They will dig deeper. They will, whenever they lose, they figure it out and do better the next time. And so all I'd say is let's learn from both mistakes made and things that we did well. And know, as we said, it's a long game. It never stops. If we get complacent, that's when we've lost. We did not get complacent in 22, which we normally do at a midterm, and that saved us. we have to do the same thing going forward, not just for 24, but even 23. Thanks. It's great to be with you guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was amazing. Thank you. All right, everybody. So you got your marching orders from David Pepper. Do not be complacent. It's a long battle. The enemy, as Hi-Fi says, never sleeps. The enemy being anti-democratic forces. And I think it's very important that we listen to our friend Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who was our guest last week, when she said that you don't memory hole a coup, and part of autocracy, and certainly the early stages, is memory repression. So let's listen to Ruth, let's stay focused, and let's be very, very busy in 2023.
Treating the GOP as though it were a normal party. And what I'm trying to do is the theme of memory. Like, we can't just, memory hold the coup. The fact that it was a violent coup and they tried to assassinate Mike Pence as well as kill all kinds of Democratic lawmakers. And you're just going to forget this? Because that's when you have autocracy coming up, there's a huge work of memory repression or self-protective, self-censorship. And I started writing about this in 2016, and I was giving talks saying, you're going to be encouraged to forget.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen.